Well, good morning. It is Sunday, the 6th of September, and I'm so glad you're able to join with us again today. The word of the Lord. I'm going to read from Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, and then verse 31. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And then verse 31, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was the evening, and there was the morning, the sixth day. This is the word of the Lord. The second chapter of Genesis talks a little bit about the development of that creation. And then the third chapter of Genesis describes the fall of mankind. That is, their sinful nature and their submission to the wiles of the devil and the temptation of the devil and the breaking of the command of God not to eat of that tree. Have everything else, but don't eat the fruit of that tree. Then over to John chapter 3, verse 16, one of the best known scriptures. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Genesis chapter 3 describes the fall. John chapter 3 describes the resurrection, if you like. Genesis chapter 3 describes the great sin, and John chapter 3 provides deliverance from sin. John chapter 3 is the solution to the events of Genesis chapter 3. And what a great provision of God that is, to give us Jesus, his Son, to redeem us from that fall. I was born in Lurgan, Northern Ireland, which is not that far from Belfast, maybe a 30-35 minute drive away from the capital city of Northern Ireland. And in 1909, a great ship was built at the Harland and Wolff shipyards in East Belfast. It was called the Titanic. Now, there was another ship built alongside the Titanic called the Olympic, not as well known. And this shipbuilding industry in the British Isles was very strong and very big, and it was very lucrative because of the transatlantic passenger appetite to go from the United States to the UK and vice versa. The shipping routes from Southampton to New York were pretty much used up by the Cunard line. Cunard had built important large ships, one called the Lusitania, the other called the Mauritania. And now the White Star Line wanted to get in on this action, and so they commissioned the building of the Titanic in the shipyards in Belfast. It was deemed to be the ship that couldn't sink. It wasn't an official title, of course, but it was deemed that it wouldn't sink because of its unique structure inside, that there were doors that could be activated in the event of the hull being breached. The water would stay within the compartments sealed by the doors, and there were 8 of those compartments. And it was believed that up to 4 of those could be compromised and the ship would still stay afloat, apart from one problem, that those doors did not go all the way to the top. There was a gap at the top, I think as far up as the 3rd deck. Nobody expected water to reach that far before they would be able to reach safety. However, on that fateful night on April 15th, April 14th is when it hit the berg, but April 15th is when it actually sank, 1912. There was no escaping the fact that actually that design perhaps assisted in the sinking of the ship as the water flowed over, creating an imbalance. Therefore, the ship went down. Titanic was a dream to fulfill an appetite for a lucrative business. And in 1909, the building began. In 1911, the building, the superstructure, was finished, and then she was fitted out. And then in April of 1912, she would sail from Belfast to Southampton, where eventually she would sail from Southampton to Cherbourg. They would take on supplies in northern France. Then from Cherbourg to Queenstown in the south of Ireland, and from there she would set out with her sights firmly set on New York. As she sailed across the North Atlantic, things were going well. The ship was moving at a good clip. There's many reasons and speculations as to why she was traveling so fast. Some believe that the owners wanted to impress potential passengers in the future that, hey, we're scheduled to arrive in New York on this particular day, but we can actually get in there a day early. That was speculation. That's just one of the theories. There's another theory as to why she was going so fast, and that theory is that there was a fire that had started in one of the boiler rooms in Southampton, and the captain wanted to not delay departure anymore, and so he decided to set sail with this fire going on in one of the boiler rooms. And that was not particularly unusual. That had happened before. They could deal with the fire in a contained area, but the coal that was burning so fiercely had driven up the speed of the ship, and maybe even, this is a theory, maybe even weakened the hull. The heat had weakened the hull, therefore making it easier for the iceberg to pierce. Now that's just a theory. That's not gospel, but it is something to be considered. Interesting thing happened that was perhaps not germane to the reason why she sank. She sank basically because she collided with an iceberg. But there were some warning signals that had been given by other ships. At 9:40 on the night of the disaster, the Mesaba ship radioed Titanic to say that there were icebergs in the area. There was an ice field, but that message was never communicated from the radio room to the bridge. At 10:55, a ship called the California also radioed Titanic to say that she was stuck in an ice field. She couldn't move because of the amount of ice. And that message never got through because the passengers were sending so many messages back home. Yeah, why not? It would be a novel idea to say, we're out in the middle of the Titanic, hope you're having a good day, wish you were here. But those superfluous messages were jamming the lines so that the real message could not be received, possibly warning the Titanic and possibly averting a disaster. The ship went down. Sorry, spoiler alert. 22 passengers on board. 1,500 of those passengers were lost. The Carpathia was a ship that was about 3 hours away, and hearing the disaster calls, went and picked up the passengers about 3:30 a.m. in the morning of April the 15th. This is not a parable. This is not just a story to make an example. This is a real life happening to make an example. We have the history of this. I have a friend who came to the office one day with a t-shirt, and on the front of the t-shirt it said RMS Titanic, built in Belfast. And I said, oh man, that's not the greatest advertising for the work of the shipbuilders of Harland and Wolff. And then as my friend turned around, on the back of it, it said these words: she was all right when she left us. Well, you know what? I'm not sure if she was particularly all right whenever she left Belfast. The number of lifeboats that were on the Titanic, and as part of the fitting out of that ship, even if they have been filled to capacity, they would only have been able to rescue 50% of the people who were on board there. So whether those lifeboats were actually put on after she went to Southampton, I'm not sure. But the t-shirt does, in fact, raise an issue. RMS Titanic, built in Belfast, she was all right when she left us. In Genesis chapter 1, creation was all right. The handiwork of God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the handiwork of the Trinity in creating male and female and creating us and sending us out. We could say we were all right when we left. But as we were dispatched into the ocean of life experiences, and as we became exposed to the wiles of the devil, who represents that iceberg, who just comes across our path. No, really, that iceberg, whether or not it just came across the path of the Titanic, I can tell you that the iceberg of Satan has his sights set on each one of us. He wants to bring us down. He wants to destroy us. He wants to put a hole in our lives. He wants to breach us so that we will all sink and we will all fail. I remember traveling to California, and I remember going on board with Pat and a group of people, the RMS Queen Mary, which was a sister ship of Titanic. And you were given a boarding pass as you went on, and there was a Titanic exhibit on the ship, on board the ship downstairs in the lower reaches of it. And as you walk around there, you begin to see different things from the Titanic, some things that had been salvaged after the wreckage had been discovered. It was a sobering experience. You were given this boarding pass with a name on it, and you looked at the name, and at the end of the tour, you then looked at the passenger list and your boarding pass, and you were to discover whether or not you survived or not. Now, if looking at the exhibit was sobering, I want to tell you something. Looking at that boarding pass and looking at that list, that manifesto, it was sobering to discover whether or not you actually survived it or you didn't. Genesis chapter 1 gives us the story of a great creation. She was all right when she left us. We were all right when we left them. Genesis chapter 3 gives us the tragic story of how humanity submitted to the enticement of the devil, to question what God had said and to put doubt into our minds, and doubt that leads to disobedience, and disobedience that leads to estrangement. And then John chapter 3, where we have the love and the mercy of God in sending his only son, Jesus, like the Carpathia, to travel not 3 hours across an Atlantic Ocean stretch, but to travel from eternity to this world, to take on the form of the very humanity that he created in Genesis chapter 1, to die on a cross so that we can be redeemed. What a beautiful, wonderful story that is. So friends, I want to tell you today that there is a redemptive story. No matter how lost you feel, no matter how attacked you feel, no matter whether you have collided with an iceberg or not, and your ship of life seems to be sinking and the waters seem to be coming over your head, I want to remind you that there were those who were delivered because they made it into the lifeboat, but there were some who were delivered because they just were able to grasp a piece of driftwood. They were still delivered. So maybe today you're holding on by your fingernails. Our God comes in his love and his mercy. He comes to save us, to deliver us, to bring us on board the good ship, Jesus Christ. And I say that reverently, and I say that carefully. There is a great hymn, and you know that I always try and conclude these little messages with the words of great classics. This was written by Frederick Lehman in 1917. Would you hear this word with me for just a few moments? The love of God is greater far than tongue or pen can ever tell. It goes beyond the highest star and reaches to the lowest hell. The guilty pair, bowed down with care, God gave his Son to win. His erring child he reconciled and pardoned from his sin. When years of time shall pass away, and earthly thrones and kingdoms fall, when men who here refuse to pray on rocks and hills and mountains call, God's love so sure shall still endure, so measureless and strong, redeeming grace to Adam's race, the saints and angels' song. The last verse goes like this: could we with ink the ocean fill, and were the skies of parchment made, were every stalk on earth a quill, and every man a scribe by trade, to write the love of God above would drain the ocean dry, nor could the scroll contain the whole, though stretched from sky to sky. O love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forevermore endure, the saints' and angels' song. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, for you, for me, for all of our fallen race. Receive him today. Just ask him to come into your heart and life, and he will. May the Lord bless you. We'll talk to you again next Sunday. Until then, stay in his care.